Start.
Welcome to another edition of On the Rocks, a Yucca Mountain overview. My name is Paul Wright. This is for the Capstone Project Nuclear Energy Engineering Technologies. Today we're going to be going over the Yucca Mountain case study where a depository that should have been in operation by now is not, and we'll look at the ramifications to the nuclear industry. Some of the things regarding the Yucca Mountain project are very important because they impact so many aspects of the nuclear industry. And today we're going to be going over several of those. So now we will be looking at the project. On the Rocks, a Yucca Mountain review by Paul Wright. Several things that I'm going to be going over during this presentation is why the funding for the project itself was canceled, some of the conflicting interests that impacted the Yucca Mountain project and why it is considered a case study, some of the solutions that we can implement in order to handle high-level radioactive nuclear waste, and then ultimately the impact of Yucca Mountain depository not being in operation. Here is a picture of the full mountain range of Yucca Mountain, where it is about 100 miles of Las Vegas, or about 100 miles away from Las Vegas, Nevada. Ultimately, the current administration, the Obama administration, canceled the funding when they were doing their fiscal year 2010 federal budget. So in 2009, the current administration decided to eliminate or cut the funding for this project. Ultimately, the Yucca Mountain project had been planned and executed for site characterization and research for over 20 years. In addition, this was the culmination of many political battles that had been occurring since 1987. Originally, the federal government decided to take action to take ownership of high-level nuclear waste, knowing full well that it would impact the nuclear industry if no action was taken. So in 1982, the Reagan administration implemented some measures in order to start this process called the Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982. It gave the Department of Energy a certain amount of time to characterize several sites. They narrowed it down to 3 sites. However, as 1987 approached, the administration demanded a site to be chosen. So in 1987, they amended the Nuclear Waste Policy Act to only study the Yucca Mountain location. Then once again, in 2002, under the Bush administration, they elected to reaffirm the chosen site of Yucca Mountain and continue pushing for that as a depository. Some of the things that led to that decision-making process is that in 1987, the state of Nevada did not have a strong voice. And in the original Nuclear Waste Policy Act, it said that the local and state governments had a say, that they could veto any site that they did not agree with happening within their state or local regions. So when Congress decided that Yucca Mountain in Nevada was to be chosen, the state of Nevada immediately submitted a veto in 1987. However, as part of the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, it also said that a 2/3 vote of Congress could override that. So in 1987 and again in 2002, Congress overrode the objections of the local and state governments to make this happen. Now, when the federal government decided to take ownership of high-level nuclear waste program management, this left that management to be affected by bipartisan politics, which is what happened with the Yucca Mountain case study, or with the Yucca Mountain depository. One of these examples is the Nuclear Waste Fund. In the 1982 original Nuclear Waste Policy Act, it authorized some charges to be made to users of the electricity produced by nuclear power plants, as well as the electric companies that are the companies that run the nuclear power plants, in order to fund a depository to store all this waste. However, when they designed it, it made those funds available for appropriation and budgeting, so that the Department of Energy had to continuously request every time we do a budget. Therefore, bipartisan politics could affect that fund. As it stands, with over 20 years of research, Yucca Mountain is still a good location for long-term storage of nuclear waste. By law, with 1982 Nuclear Waste Policy Act and its amendments in 1987 and its approval in 2002, Yucca Mountain is still designated as the nation's only approved geological depository. If funds could be restored to continue the project, then this could effectively renew the project with all those years of research and be able to start construction. Now, since funding was eliminated, originally the Department of Energy finally was able to do enough research to request a license for construction of the site in 2008. However, when they eliminated the funding, the Department of Energy had to lay off all the workers associated with the project because they did not get the funding to continue that. And then they requested a withdrawal of license in 2011. This, of course, started a series of civil lawsuits against the Department of Energy for not providing a depository, because according to the original Nuclear Waste Policy Act, they had until 1998 to get one up and running so that we can start moving and storing high-level radioactive waste safely in a geological depository. In addition, another curveball that was thrown to the Yucca Mountain funding is that because the federal government did not continue its project, the civil court, U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, determined that the nuclear waste fund should not continue and we should not be charged because the federal government had defaulted on its obligation for the Yucca Mountain location for the storing of nuclear waste. So in 2014, this year, they terminated the taxes associated with the nuclear waste fund. Now, there are several conflicting interests here, mainly based on political lines. However, so they come from a variety of levels. From the federal level, Democrat and Republican, and then the state versus federal government, and then local governments and tribal governments have all objected to Yucca Mountain as the site. Even though Yucca Mountain is on the edge of the Nevada test site that was used to test nuclear weapons and nuclear devices for the federal government. When Yucca Mountain was originally chosen in 1987 and the Department of Energy started their research, the Department of Energy was delayed in their research because the local and state regulations were changed by the state and local governments to try to prevent that from happening. However, eventually the federal government won and overruled their rules to allow the Department of Energy to characterize or research the site. There were several issues that occurred that opponents of Yucca Mountain cited as being scientific evidence that this is not a good site. One of those was the discovery of chlorine-36. Chlorine-36, radioactive element, comes from water, leaking through the mountain. One of the things that they had to determine was about water intrusion at the site, because we stored high-level waste underneath the mountain, or at least that is the proposed idea. We needed to check the water intrusion to see if water would get down to where the containers are and cause corrosion. So the discovery of chlorine-36 in the mountain was cited by opponents as being that the site was not good enough and water could get in there. However, based on the geological deposits of chlorine-36, it would not get to the location to where it would be stored because it would be stored deep in the mountain. In addition, New evidence showed that plutonium from the Nevada test site had migrated almost a mile underground in the course of 50 years, which was contrary to previous scientific evidence that said that plutonium would take millions of years to migrate. This caused concern so that if the storage units were breached for any reason, then the plutonium would be able to migrate and cause all kinds of environmental and unlawful human exposure. However, scientific evidence proved that based on the geologic sites of manganese in Yucca Mountain, however, that plutonium would not migrate because of the high manganese content of Yucca Mountain. Another conflict that opponents cited was the fact that Yucca Mountain was on a range that was susceptible to earthquakes and volcanoes. Now, while earthquakes and volcanoes have occurred near that area, Yucca Mountain itself is a settled landmass that has minimal earthquakes with lots of fault lines. So no major earthquake would hit there because it would all be diffused along those fault lines. In addition, research has shown that there's only 1 in a million chance that a volcano will occur in such a long period of time that was judged. Another issue was that quality assurance control data was reported as being falsified from the Department of Energy when they were doing their research. When the Department of Energy released this, opponents jumped on this as being, well, now they're lying about all the characterization. However, Department of Energy reaffirmed their data by submitting it to independent parties for review, and those came back as being good so that they could continue their research. Finally, opponents jumped on the fact that the Environmental Protection Agency standards were less than the National Academy of Sciences, which is normally used by the federal government. The EPA actually had a 10,000-year range of being able to assess the effects of storing high-level radioactive waste. National Academy of Sciences determined that 1 million years is a more reasonable estimate because of the decay of plutonium and how long it takes. So in this case, they brought court action against the EPA to delay it, and the EPA had to rewrite their standards to match the National Academy of Sciences. Despite all those delays, the Yucca Mountain project still continued until funding was eliminated. And then that's at what point that it had to stop. Some other solutions for nuclear waste that have been going on is that we have been storing this high-level nuclear waste in wet pools and dry casks. We put the new high-level radioactive hot waste in wet pools to keep it cool and controlled and monitored. Once it gets cool enough, it can be transferred to a secure dry cask on site for where the location of which it was created. According to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, this is a measure that is good enough to last for a while until we can determine a more permanent solution. However, because we have around 67,000 tons of high-level radioactive waste with over 2,000 tons accumulating each year, this does not seem quite realistic because the energy companies that run these nuclear power plants have a limited amount of space. In addition, they've had to pay the money in order to build the wet pools and dry casks to store this nuclear material or nuclear high-level waste. In addition to having to pay into the nuclear waste fund, which was meant to be as a measure to have a permanent storage instead of wet pools and dry casks. Now, Yucca Mountain could, if approved, store up to 150,000 at its maximum capacity tons. Right now, it would only be certified for 77,000 tons. Preliminary reports from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission at the last juncture when they were able to assess it said that all the precautions taken by the Department of Energy seemed reasonable. However, this does show that while the Yucca Mountain will definitely help our nuclear waste problem, we need to take further actions because it's slowly filling up. Successful examples of how other countries have navigated the political landscape are in Sweden and Finland, which focused on coordination between local, state, and federal agencies and regulations prior to any characterization, prior to any research. This is something that was not done in the United States, and therefore now we are paying for it. Scientific evidence proves that geological depositories are the best option when dealing with high-level radioactive waste. When the Obama administration eliminated the funding, they also put into action a team of 15 people called the Blue Ribbon Commission on America's Nuclear Future to figure out ways to proceed on how to handle this problem with the storage of nuclear waste. While it was created in 2010 and finished all of its reports in 2012, some of the key things that came out of that report is having an agency dedicated solely to the management of nuclear waste. In addition, have the funds only directly available to that organization that is created, such as the Nuclear Waste Fund. Instead of it being subjected to bipartisan politics, it would go directly into the company that is running the nuclear waste program for the United States, independent of the federal government. The impact of the Yucca Mountain cannot be overstated. With as much high-level nuclear waste as being created, this can definitely impact the operation of nuclear power plants. If wet and dry cask storage space becomes too limited, then we cannot create any more, and the nuclear power plants would have to shut down. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, 20% in 2014, 20% of the electrical power of the United States come from nuclear power plants. This would have an immense impact for the total population of the United States if suddenly 20% of the electrical capacity of the United States went away because we could not run the nuclear reactors. So there's definitely a need for multiple repositories, as has been shown, because of the limit of Yucca Mountain. But Yucca Mountain can definitely help the nuclear industry. Once again, in 2014, the Nuclear Waste Fund income was removed. Energy companies and people paying the rates no longer are required to pay into that fund until the government takes action to not be default on their contract. In addition, lawsuits by energy companies for the federal government not following the law, the Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982, has caused several energy companies to be awarded millions of dollars. These millions of dollars are paid by the taxpayers, so it's definitely an impact to everybody. A variety of references were used in this. News articles, journals, other articles and interviews. As you can see, references page, New York Times, other technical journals, specifically the Blue Ribbon Commission's final report, myths and facts about the Yucca Mountain project, resources, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and the like. More resources. There is quite a bit of resources for this project. Finally, and ultimately, the Yucca Mountain case study is a case study to show in what not to do. When you involve politics into a situation, such as something as sensitive as high-level radioactive waste, a bunch of problems crop up. The Blue Ribbon Commission that was commissioned by the Obama administration, supported by the Department of Energy Secretary, came up with a variety of good ways in order to proceed. Ultimately, the high-level radioactive waste situation needs to be resolved, and even though they have submitted this report in 2012, no action has been taken by the federal government to date to make good on the contracts that they decided in 1982. Overall, Yucca Mountain, while it would help the nuclear waste problem, is only part of the solution. More depositories need to be organized, and they need to be organized at the local and state levels as well in order to support this. High incentives from the federal government for local and state officials would definitely help the process. For more information, please refer to my team member, Edward Quinones, who has another presentation that goes with this one, first part, that discusses the basis of design of the Yucca Mountain project and the research that went into it. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation.